Well, this is probably one of the most important topics because this is affecting a lot of families in America. Drug addiction, heroin, opiates. I'm so glad that you're on the show today. Greetings, Red Tie community. It's the bald guy in the red tie, your favorite bald-headed red tie wearing host of the Red Tie Community Show. And Rocky, did you know they did a poll recently in the New York Times, and I was voted the favoritist host of the Red Tie Community Show. You know why?
The favoritist.
The
I like
favoritist.
that. Is that in the dictionary?
It is.
The
It is
favoritist?
now.
It is now. Okay.
It's because I'm the only host of the Red Tie
You're the-
Community Show.
Ah, very well. I was just on the front page of the New York Times. In all honesty.
Were you really?
Yeah. That's another story.
Don't ever show up the host of the Red Tie Community Show, okay? Rule number one.
Usually only animals do that,
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Rocky Hill with Hill Counseling with drug and alcohol addiction. You are the front runner in this area, maybe the world, but you know a lot about addiction. You've probably seen it all, I would imagine. But we have a very serious epidemic right now in America. We have people that are getting hooked on pain pills. They're sliding into the heroin, and I'm telling you things that you already know. But I think today's show is going to be very important for maybe people that are suffering from addiction, but also family and friends that have a loved one, and maybe they don't know what to do.
Right.
So thanks for being on the show, man.
My pleasure. You and I have been good friends for a long time.
We have.
So, what I want to do is to simply convey to people who may be experiencing a problem of their own or with a loved one, some hope that there's a way to change their lives. And I'm living proof of that. And I spent 14 years, and I pretty much did all the drugs that were around, and pretty near killed myself, and ended up with pancreatitis, gastritis, liver disease. But I'd always been looking. When I was in college at Oklahoma State, I was looking in Eastern religions, in philosophy, all kinds of places for what is the answer to this emptiness I feel inside, this sense that I'm not good enough the way I am, and that there's more to life than I'm getting out of it. And I couldn't find it in any of the religions. I thought then I could find it in hallucinogenic drugs, and so I'd inject large doses of PCP and talk to God, but all the things that he shared with me, I couldn't bring back.
Right.
It just wasn't the same. And so I finally just gave up and said, I'm just going to do what feels good, and that's it. And that took me down the road. So we can talk about any aspect of that you want.
How old were you when you started with, testing the waters of addiction kind of thing? I'm sure it wasn't an addiction immediately, but, were you in your teens or 20s?
I was a senior in high school, and I specifically, it is like etched in my brain that we were headed ended up at New Mexico Military Institute because I had been caught by my parents drinking, and they kind of overreacted and decided that I needed to go to a military school. And in any case, I remember we were drinking Tall Boy Colt 45s. Last time I ever have consumed that. But the thing I noticed that was so important was that I was changing. I was getting taller, smarter, better looking, funnier. Everything was just, I was a better me. And
according to you, right?
As I felt,
Yeah.
And that's the only, that really is the measure of who we are. It's how we feel.
Interesting.
So I wasn't really 6'5", so.
You still aren't.
Nope.
So would you say, and I don't know about your family history and stuff like that, but was there kind of maybe a sense of abandonment being pushed out of the house kind of thing, and was that creating that void that you're trying to fill, or was that something that went back even further kind of thing?
I think there was both a genetic component.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's side is Irish,
Mm-hmm.
and my father was an alcoholic. He was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and my grandfather on that side, my uncle on that side, died of drinking Sterno under the bridge in Los Angeles, and so it seemed to just run on that side, while the other side was Scandinavian, and for whatever reason, like my mom would put ice cubes in her wine and cranberry juice and things like that, and say things like, "No more for me, I'm beginning to feel it," which I thought was the craziest thing in the world. That's the point.
Gotta go first to sixth gear, right?
That's right. So I think there was that element, and then, I think that, and I don't think that my family caused my addiction. I think it was just a number of factors, and ultimately I was responsible for finding a way to be able to change that. Yeah. And I was looking everywhere, and I couldn't find any way to get rid of that sense that I wasn't good enough the way I was. And I was in a fraternity at Oklahoma State, and my nickname was Cocky Rocky. So the mask I put out was that, I'm hip, slick, and cool, and nothing bothers me, but inside was a very different person.
Yeah.
And so, I think that my dad was pretty much a disciplinarian, and my sister was gone early, and so anyway, that's just, but ultimately I was the one who picked up went from the alcohol to, then LSD at a Jimi Hendrix concert and at OU, and on from there, and then other drugs that were more destructive.
And so was your preferred method of poison mostly alcohol, or is it kind of a 50-50 mix, or just whatever was in front of you to take care of the day?
Quaaludes were my favorite, but you don't hear about that anymore. Methaqualone. I think it's the only drug that they've been able to completely eliminate in the world.
Wow, did they?
There's no, I don't know of anyone who's ever been able to. We've never had a patient come in that was using Quaaludes.
Wow.
And yet there was a time in the 60s and 70s when Quaaludes were just everywhere. They were the sedative of choice for physicians, and they were supposedly non-addictive, and I proved them wrong with that. I had 2 grand mal seizures coming off of them, and so but it was, it kind of was what year, when what was your drug of choice? Well, it varied as my life progressed. After I graduated from Oklahoma State, I became a juvenile parole officer, which doesn't fit very well with somebody who's using drugs, and also, most people who use drugs deal drugs. And so I was also selling them, and it created quite a bit of concern on my part, but I was also selling at that time, cocaine was considered to be non-addictive.
Is this in the 70s?
That was into the 70s, later 70s, and 80, and I remember going down and testifying about. I was an expert witness for juvenile courts, and I testify about drugs, and then the 2 DAs and the 2 public defenders and I would go off into the law library, and they had a nice glass top table much like this one, and you could lock the door and no windows, and I would sell them grams of cocaine, and we would line it out on the table.
DA. Wow.
And and then at some point he he let me know that things were getting kind of hairy, that the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and the FBI were talking to him about me.
Ooh.
Specifically. And that is what led me to say, Oklahoma might not be the best place for me. So I left and went to Palm Springs, California.
Wow.
My mom lived there and owned a motel. So.
Interesting. So you moved to Palm Springs, and then your life's magically better, and you never did drugs, alcohol ever again?
Oh, yeah. Right.
That's how it works, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the story of every addict?
Because the problem was Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It was that bad,
that darn
horrible
Oklahoma.
wife I had at that time, the first wife. I have another one now.
You
much,
upgraded.
Much better. Yeah. I just didn't, have any resources for drugs anymore in Palm Springs. I mean, I probably could have found them, but alcohol became my drug of choice. It was easy. My mom bought alcohol, and although she didn't drink much of it, she'd buy it in cases because it was cheaper, and we just went through it a lot quicker after I got there.
Yeah, right.
So
what was the point for you where you're like, wow, my life's a freaking mess? Was there an aha moment, or was it kind of an extended dribbling on the bottom of the gutter kind of thing?
it was quite a bit of dribbling, and then finally, a crash. And the crash consisted of vomiting blood, and I knew that I was really sick, and contacted a fella up in Idlewild. I would go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. The only problem was I would go drunk, and because it made me nervous to have to talk in front of people. And so, I'd tell them how great it worked. And they all just looked at me and smiled, and nobody ever made fun of me or said, "Get out of here, you're drunk."
Accepted you as you were. That's good.
And so I had met a few people, and one of them owned a restaurant up in Idlewild, and he told me to come up there. And so I went up to Idlewild, and my stomach was bloated out with gastritis, and I was pretty sick physically. And he made me some chicken noodle soup and some milk, gave me a glass of milk, and probably should have left the milk out, because it wasn't long before I had brought it all back up on the table. And that's, if you want to empty a restaurant, that's a very...
It's a good way to clear the door, huh? Oh, man.
Breakfast they were done. It was time to go home. And, the thing that amazed me was he didn't even miss a beat. He grabbed a rag and he said, "Don't you worry about a trash can." And he just said, "You're going to get sober. You're just an alcoholic, and you're going to find sobriety." I had no confidence that I was, but he did. And so anyway, shortly thereafter, I drove back down to Palm Springs and ended up calling a doctor, and he brought me straight in and shot me full of Demerol, put me in the hospital, and for 10 days I was hooked up to IVs for pancreatitis and gastritis and all that stuff. So,
and then finally,
yeah,
you got the message?
Well, no, I didn't.
Of course not.
Of course not. I hallucinated. I heard my friends come over the intercom and saw them out in the parking lot when I looked out the window of the 5th floor of Desert Hospital. And got up and went out and looked for him, couldn't find him, and but each day he would come and sit at the foot of my bed, and he'd say, "We're saving a bed for you, Rocky, over on the alcohol and drug treatment unit." And I'd say, "Dr. Cargill, I think you can give that to somebody else. I think I've got this thing under control now." He would smile, and finally he didn't show up, and a nurse did with a wheelchair, and they wheeled me into the treatment program. And so I knew that I had to complete the treatment program in order to get the job back, so I stayed, and I knew how to do group therapy, and I knew how to manipulate and I knew how to keep them away from my feelings. The one constant, the one absolute that I can tell you that every alcoholic and addict experiences is a disconnect between cognition and emotion, between thinking and feeling. And I had shoved those feelings away long before, and I could deal with philosophy and sports and all kinds of stuff like that, but don't ask me to tell you how I feel. That was not going to happen. And so I skated through the program, but fortunately they had me go to these AA meetings, and they, you know, I saw people who had what I wanted. They were happy. They went home in a car, a nice car. I went home in the van, hospital van.
Yeah.
And so left the treatment program, and they gave me a little coin, and I went straight to Thrifty's and bought a gallon of wine. Drank for 3 days, put a gun in my mouth, and said, I'm done. And when you consider suicide, there are a lot of people in your head that start to have opinions about that. And so part of me said, hurry, just pull the trigger. And another part said, you know what, dead's a long time. And maybe you need to, maybe there's another option. And I came up with another option, and I decided that I was going to give this recovery thing that these people had somehow, it had worked in their lives. I was going to give it 6 months. And if it didn't work, then I was going to go rob a pharmacy. And I just didn't feel like I should waste a suicide. You only get one. And this thing might work. This just, it worked for them.
Right.
I was afraid it might not work for me. So so I walked 8 blocks, and that is why I believe so strongly in outpatient treatment, because if that program had been 100 miles away, I don't know what I would have done. I'm sure I would have just gone out and got something to drink. But I walked the 8 blocks to the treatment facility, and for the first time they saw me come in with tears streaming down my cheeks, and I said, I will do whatever you tell me to do. And that was the change.
That was the turning point.
That was the moment.
And so when is this? Is this the 80s?
Yeah, December 3rd, 1980.
Wow, you remember the date?
Yeah.
Wow. And then so from there, you went through recovery. Life got better in those 6 months. You didn't rob the pharmacy.
Oh, didn't rob the pharmacy. Started working out the gym every day, playing racquetball, lifting weights.
Starting to feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
And then, so at that point, is that when you decided I'm going to start my own recovery outpatient facility?
No, I didn't feel, I wasn't even sure that I was really, that I had anything to give. I needed to learn. And I really wanted to be more humble than oh, here, let me tell you how to do it.
Cocky Rocky.
Yeah, Cocky Rocky was gone. And so, I just went to lots of meetings and got a couple of sponsors. I figured, they were cheap. Take as many as I could. And things began to change. And so went to work for the Riverside County and in a methadone program, in their drug-free program. Well, I was not very popular. So the patients came and got their methadone, and these were all opiate addicts. And of course, right now we're in the midst of an opiate epidemic.
Yeah.
And so that was, where I really began to learn about opiates and medication-assisted treatment, and that they were finding another way. But, I saw some questions about whether it was working as efficiently as it could.
Yeah. So opening up that chapter now of opiates, you hit it right on the head. Obviously, you're the expert of it, but we are in an epidemic. And in fact, I know, a handful of people in my own life that they're not doing very good. One just went back to jail. He's been in and out of jail, and unfortunately, they caught him again, with some heroin and stuff like that, and some other charges that were brought into him. So it seems like once that heroin gets a hold of you, and he was the classic story of started off on the pain pills, and then that got cut off from that, and then drifted over into the heroin stuff. And I have another good friend of mine that just recently tried to kill himself by overdosing, kind of thing. And these are great people, very talented people, but man, once that gets a hold of you, it just seems to destroy you quickly. I mean, they've lost everything,
Right.
And it's not just them, these are younger guys, but, you hear about the soccer moms, you hear about the older people, the people that you would never think that would be caught into addiction, because they're not like that, right? They're not the homeless people, these are people that are living next door to people, and so
They're educated. They're,
they have it together,
Right.
it looks like,
right.
and
Everything looks good.
So how can you kind of pull back that curtain of what's going on there? I mean, because it's a thing. It's big.
Well, I alluded to that genetic component, and however we get exposed to the substance, there are people who, I had an aunt who said, Rocky, I wish that I could be an alcoholic, or those pills that you used to steal from me, that Dilaudid, I wish that worked for me, but it doesn't. When I drink or I use that Dilaudid, I feel dizzy and out of control. And she'd always been a miserable woman. She was on the same side of the family, the Irish side, but just didn't get it. Just didn't work.
Right. So,
someone benignly goes in and, they've got some sort of injury, and they experience that transition from point A to B, from some dysphoria, some sense of inadequacy, loneliness, emptiness, and all of a sudden it's
that relief.
I'm in the moment. I'm right here. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not resentful. I'm not ashamed. I'm right here, right now. And that's where we all want to be. And so, no one sets out to say, okay, well, I'm going to do this to the point that it devastates my life and I lose my family and perhaps my life. We set out with, I'm just going to do a little bit. I can control it. And that's the illusion in that very often, we just can't control it.
Is that the devil's trick? Oh,
Yeah.
come on, you could do this. Just
Yeah.
one little hit. Come on, you're
I'll
fine.
quit tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing it. Come
Yeah.
on.
And that's exactly what what happens with so many of the people that have come in through the years, because we've been here now in Temecula for 32 years, and so we've seen the whole meth epidemic, and now this tsunami of opiates and benzodiazepines, Xanax, those kind of drugs, and it's scary because methamphetamine made you look like you were dead, and maybe feel like it, but opiates really kill you.
Yeah.
And the irony is that if you go into treatment and you go spend 30 or 60 days in an inpatient treatment facility, your chances of coming out and overdosing are 75 times higher than if you were released from prison or if you just stayed out on the streets. Because your tolerance now has dropped significantly. So now the amount that you need to get to that state of intoxication has been lessened, and also in that period of time, typically the heroin has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. So the more that's coming in, the stronger it is, and more it's cut with things like fentanyl and carfentanil. And,
Yeah, what the hell is that crap? I'm not familiar with. I hear about it, fentanyl, but why are the dealers putting it in there? Is it like heroin, or is it just a mixture thing that they're throwing into it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an opiate, and it they reference it and the carfentanil as an elephant tranquilizer because that's what they would use it for. But the fact is, it's just an extremely powerful opiate, and the unfortunate thing too is that if an individual is overdosed on fentanyl or carfentanil, very often the typical things that an EMT or emergency room would use, what's called naloxone or Narcan, and they can squeeze it up their nose or they can inject them with it, and it'll immediately take away the withdrawal. The increased sedation and pulmonary dysfunction, and the person's basically dying. They're turning blue until they get hit with that naloxone, and it hits the mu receptor site, and it knocks all the opiate off. If it's OxyContin, heroin, that kind of drug.
But not fentanyl.
But fentanyl and carfentanil, it takes multi-doses. I've heard of 7, 8 doses.
Wow.
Just to get, whereas in most situations, 1 dose is sufficient to get the person back to a state of balance, and they can survive.
So a few moments ago, you mentioned that there was kind of like this wave of the methamphetamines and stuff like that, which is still out there and stuff. But would you say that there's almost like an increase with the opiates because it typically comes, or maybe it starts with, a guy in a white jacket, the doctor saying, here, just take these for the anxiety or whatever. So maybe people feel like, oh, well, the doctor prescribed it, so, this is okay. And then it just traps them into that, and then they get cut off from that, and that's what leads them into the hard stuff, the heroin kind of thing.
Well, I think there was a time when, because I don't want to blame it on the doctors, there was a time when the medical establishment nationwide, I was on the hospital board here and at Inland Valley Hospital, and I can remember Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospital Organizations, when they would come in, they would say, you need to address pain with patients when they hit the door, and that needs to be the 5th or 6th vital sign. And so while you take their blood pressure and pulse and everything else, you also assess their pain level and treat that pain level. And so doctors were encouraged to dispense medications. If a person was in pain, give them a painkiller. And a family made $1 billion or more off of a pharmaceutical company that sold OxyContin, and they convinced doctors that it was non-narcotic, that non-addictive, that patients couldn't get addicted to it.
Wow.
And that wasn't the case. The addict is resourceful. And so they would just chew it up or crush it up and inject it, and the outcome was the same.
Yeah. I had a family member who she had struggled with addiction for a long time, and she would go to the emergency rooms and she would play the game. And this was 10 to 15 years ago, so I know things have changed with databases and stuff like that. But she would play the game where, it's at a 9. I'm at a 9. I need my pain. And that was like her full-time job, was just going and hustling these places. Like, the addict life is just treacherous. But she ended up dying, and then her boyfriend, who was also into that addiction as well, they would take like 14, 15 of these pills at a time, kind of thing.
Right.
Like that's how their tolerance was, and he ended up dying, shortly thereafter. But the sad part is they had a tween-age son at the time. And luckily, he's had some great grandparents that have took him in, and he's a fantastic young man now. But just the devastation that kid saw breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately a very common story,
Yeah. The sense of betrayal that child feels as mom and dad, because they have no way of understanding the power of the addiction, and yet they see them choose the drug over the child in their best interest.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that the withdrawal from opiates is there's an acute phase, and the acute phase is typically what we associate with opiates. And you vomit, and there's diarrhea, and you feel EBGBs, and you feel horrible. Then that goes away, 10, 12 days, and that pretty much has run its course. But what we didn't understand for so many years was that there's what's called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And so what's happened is that the mu and kappa receptor sites in the brain are there to pick up endorphins, endogenous morphine, in the brain. So when you're 5 years old, you fall down, you skin your knee, you get some endorphins, and it mitigates the pain a little bit. But when you take a Norco, hydrocodone, or oxycodone, or one of those, that's 50, 60 times. And so the brain has to adjust. It has a need to establish homeostasis. And so what happens is the brain goes into a state of creating new receptor sites, new mu and kappa receptor sites. So now I'm 10, 12 days down the road, everything's fine and dandy. I think everybody tells me I'm supposed to be feeling fine, and yet I've got this sense of just, I can't sleep, I can't eat, there's just, we call it anhedonia, inability to experience pleasure. So that can only go on so long. I had a lady in my office, a soccer mom, perfect epitome of a soccer mom. And she said, Rocky, if it weren't for my kids, I'd kill myself. I started on Norco. My doctor put me on it for a knee injury 18 months ago. And I've been off it for 18 months. And she said, just something happened. My brain, I'm different. Wow. I'm a different person. And we were able to use, there's a medication called buprenorphine, and it's now become the substance of the drug of choice, the treatment of choice. And we started using it in 2004 and received a lot of criticism. And now the Betty Ford Center finally in 2016 or 17 came around and said, hey, the evidence is there. This is the way we have to go. And we're losing too many people. And now we just had a lady, in fact, in our office today, and they have an injectable. So it lasts for 30 days. And the mu and kappa receptor sites are now returned to a state of normalcy. So the person isn't in that anhedonia, and they're able to feel.
And then they get weaned off of that.
Then eventually there's a slow, gradual. But the interesting thing is that the withdrawal then is completely different. In fact, with this lady, we put her on Suboxone or buprenorphine, and had her on it for a few months, and then started a slow taper. And by the time she was done, she was fine. She was back to being normal.
Wow. One of the big challenges that I think probably a lot of families and friends face, I know that I face this, is that what is that balancing act? Or maybe you can provide some advice on this, but you have a loved one that's going down this path, you see it's destroying them, and their actions have a blowback on your own life kind of thing. How do you balance that love, like you want to love that person through, thick and thin, because that's what love does, right? But then you can easily slip into that codependency where you're, oh, I just want to make sure you're okay, the rescuer and all those kind of personality types and stuff like that. Because I can imagine, especially for parents, like if you see your star child that's done so well in life and all of a sudden they're going down this path, what is that balancing act? Is it just the tough love and suck it up, buttercup, don't talk to us until you're clean kind of thing, or do you cut them off completely? Like, is there a clear answer? There probably isn't it.
No, I think there's a clear answer. You get them help. You get the whole family help, because the family has to understand what is their loved one experiencing, and what do they need to do to be able to let go, and at the same time maintain their love, and not allow it to turn into anger. And because right now we're seeing just kids coming in, young adults, on full ride scholarships to universities academically and athletically, and a Major League Baseball player, and he was supposed to be in summer camp down in Florida, and he was on our couch and just pouring sweat off his nose. And we got him over to the physician, and I got a call from him 45 minutes after he left the doctor's office, and he said, I'm at the gym, I'm working out, and thank you. And he was able to get in shape before spring ball, and then ended up MVP in his league. So
wow,
yeah, it was a good story.
So the impact that Hill Counseling has, I love impacts. I love the ripple effect of impacts. When somebody can change their lives, you changed your life, and then now you're changing other people's lives, and then that has that ripple effect. So it's going to be pretty amazing to see all this one day on the big screen of heaven, as I like to believe. But, so you've been doing this for 32 years here in the Temecula Valley, and you actually have your own holiday that was dedicated to you by the city of Temecula or Murrieta?
Well, Chuck Washington is a good friend of mine, and on our 25th anniversary, I think, they named a
Rocky Hill Day.
And no. Be careful here. Rocky and Debbie Hill Day.
You're better half. You're much better half.
You know what? I think it was Debbie and Rocky Hill Day.
Oh, she got the headliner there.
She got the headline. So, and that's fine with me. She did a lot of the work. So, I'm very often given the accolades, and believe me, my strengths were her. My weaknesses were her strengths, and vice versa.
Good catch there, buddy.
Yeah.
You've been married a long time, I can tell.
You think these things through before you let them out the mouth.
I'm coming up on 15 years of marriage, and so I figured out those verbal landmines. Maybe not all of them, because I still step on them every once in a while.
And I know your wife.
Yeah?
I am.
Yeah, so the way that we met, Mr. Rocky Hill and I, my wife and his daughter were childhood friends from like 4 years old or something like that. So when I came in the picture, I got to know your family, and
right.
It's just been a blessing to know you, and I see the impact that you make, and it's so important, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show. I've actually had your name, like I said before the show, I've had your name on the whiteboard of guests that I want to have in here. But you're always, flying around the world, or you're doing something fun. So I'm just glad that we finally had this moment to pull back the curtain, because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yep.
I think people don't know how to have the conversation. And so, to have someone like you that can articulate it and demystify it and not make it so bad in the sense, because I think there's a lot of shame that's wrapped up with addiction. And so people don't want to talk about, oh, well, my son, little Johnny here, is going down this path here. Nobody wants to talk about that at the soccer games, right?
Right.
But I think it's a conversation that really needs to be had, because people are dying. This is a life and death situation.
Yeah,
So,
they're dying in huge numbers.
yeah.
More young people die of opiate overdoses than automobile accidents.
Wow.
And we passed that a long time ago.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, we passed that number. And now it's just, I brought a little bit of stuff, but in 2017, more than 47,000 Americans died as a result of an opioid overdose.
Wow.
And yet we have a very fragmented treatment system that is beginning to come together.
Yeah.
I can see some improvements, but there's a tremendous amount of corruption in the field, and unfortunately, there are a lot of folks who've moved in to take advantage of that, and in the process, they've made a lot of money, but they've also hurt a lot of people. And so we've fought that and got sued for that, but we prevailed in that, and it's, we're blessed. That's all I can say is that, I get to walk into the grocery store and somebody comes up and says, hey, you know what? Somebody in my life or themselves, you saved their life. And I say, no, I don't want that. I didn't save anybody's life. I don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
But I can lay out options and alternatives that will give the individual the capacity to save their own life with a sense of spirituality and a sense of purpose.
And there's some grace there, some love. There's no judgment, condemnation kind of thing
Right.
when they come to you. So what is the experience like for, let's say, an addict shows up to your door or to the facility at Hill Counseling in Temecula, California? What is the A to Z kind of process? What is that kind of bird's eye view of that?
Well, we do a screening from the very beginning. As soon as a person calls in, we want somebody there to talk to them. So once they call in, whatever time of night it is or day, we talk to the individual, whether it be the family member or the patient, and make sure that there isn't a reason that they wouldn't be appropriate for treatment with us. That there isn't a medical problem that precludes treatment with us, being outpatient, that we may need to get them into a inpatient program immediately, a hospital-based program. If there's a psychiatric issue, then we need to look at that, because although we treat depression and anxiety disorders and things like that, there are psychiatric disorders that we don't treat. So, but then from there on, it's a matter of continuing that screening process and finding out what brought the person in. We know it's pain. They didn't wake up in the morning and go, oh, my life's going great. I think I'll go to Hill. And so we start the process of what are we going to be doing with this person, and also giving them a sense of hope that this isn't just, well, you're going to stop drinking and using drugs and everything's going to be fine and that's going to be it. They need to know that they're going to be dealing with tears and feelings, and the family's going to be involved. And so every Monday night, the families come in for treatment with the patients, and no matter what program they're in. And we are a licensed ambulatory detox program, but we will only treat patients that are appropriate. And so we have medical staff who make that call. And but then we can pick them up quicker because we have the nursing staff. But most importantly, I think, is that we have dogs running around the facility, and we've rescued a number of dogs, and it's interesting to watch some young man come in and he's angry, and mom and dad have made him come in, and he doesn't need this is stupid, he's embarrassed, his friends know about this is crazy, and all of a sudden Rex will jump up on the couch and stare at him.
Rex is trained, huh?
Yeah, and he just stares at him.
Yeah.
And And pretty soon that kid just can't help, because one of the things about alcoholics and addicts is they have a level of sensitivity. They test much higher on tests of IQ, sensitivity, and creativity. And so he just can't help himself. He got to pet that dog. Well, there go those defense mechanisms. Now we're starting to get past that.
Right.
And we're not the enemy. We're here to give the individual tools that they can use to change their life. And so it's very non-judgmental, and there's a lot of laughter, a lot of tears, a lot of just real good feelings.
So important. So important. Well, any final thoughts you want to share with the community here?
No, I just think that, gosh, we have some great leaders in this community, and I would like to see more of a focus on creating a master plan for this community. There's been a tremendous amount of resistance in the past, historically, and I think it was basically driven by the real estate industry because they wanted to make it look like this was the place you could come and there weren't any drugs.
Those darn realtors.
Those realtors. But, it was a general consensus, I think. I don't want to blame realtors, and I'll have people calling me. There was a general consensus that, hey, we, this is a nice, safe place, and we don't really have those kind of problems. And we do.
Yeah. And
since we do, just like everybody else, we need to respond. And we need to respond proactively and make sure that that we get people before they die.
That's the goal. That's the mission.
That's it.
Well, Rocky, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate all that you do for this community, the lives that you're affecting, and keep it up.
I feel blessed and blessed to know you and be your friend, and a little wife you got at home that gets to take care of the kids while you earn a living.
I do all this fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Rocky, thank you so much. And that concludes this episode of the Red Tie Community Show with Mr. Rocky Hill of Hill Counseling and your favorite bald-headed red tie wearing realtor and show host, bald guy in the red tie, John Butler, saying see you in escrow, bye.